The influence of Roman culture on Christianity is something that Christianity doesn't often acknowledge, their polytheistic state religion an ignorant cause in Christian eyes. Yet, upon taking a closer look, we can still see influences making their way into different parts of Christian reception. This presentation will go over the presence of Roman thought in the development of Christianity. This will include both religious and artistic elements, while distinguishing its difference from Judaism. We see the rise of early Christianity after the destruction of the Second Jewish Temple, which in many ways acts as a response to the outcome of the Jewish War. One of the biggest divisions we see between Judaism and early Christianity, as it breaks away to be its own religion, is the interest in Gentiles, or those who aren't considered to be God's chosen people. This sparks a distinction between Judaism, whose practice entails a good deal of segregation to outside influences. We see this idea, books written during the Babylonian exile, looking back in time for this inspiration and demonstrating characters like Jezebel or Delilah. These Gentile women warn readers from the dangers of foreign identity, and ultimately away from the temptation of their practices. Again, we see why Jewish identity revolves around its separation from others. However, this is not the case in Christianity. Despite Christianity being an early Jewish sect, we see this translation from these fixed ideals to move to more of a leniency towards the very people the Hebrew Bible advises believers against, the Gentiles. Christianity begins to move towards this idea that anyone can be saved and live as a child of God, beginning this shift to receive anyone into their religion. Because this movement emerges during the imperial rule of Rome, Roman culture is bound to have an impact on the formation of early Christianity. For example, much later we see that when Christianity becomes the state religion, Roman basilicas are used as the first churches, and Roman gods and other deities are reused to represent saints and holy ancestry. We see here on the left Old St. Peter's Cathedral, and on the right Santa Sabina. These both follow the same structural plan to a Roman basilica, and our basic understanding of the church as we see it today revolves around this original structure. We can even see instances where they reuse old Roman statues for saints. The head of the reliquary statue of Santa Foy thought to have been originally from an original Roman statue. Though this does not encompass the presence of polytheistic influences, it does show Roman influence. Another one of the influences we see from the Romans are the early Christian meeting places that arise. The earliest form of communal worship mapped out in early Christian texts were done in Roman domestic spaces. This is quite possibly due to ongoing persecution, but either way, there would have included the presence of these Roman domestic cult shrines in these spaces. Its presence alone is obviously not that large of an influence. However, the difference between the lack of such images in Jewish worship compared to the presence in early Christian should be noticed. This is also important as it becomes quite clear that these churches were patronized by wealthier members as Christianity gained popularity among the Gentiles, which means they would have needed the support of the broader polytheistic community in order to succeed financially. Their meeting spaces slowly developed a hierarchy run by the wealthy, who used their own domestic spaces to cultivate members of faith. There were obviously movements against this, however, the polytheistic influence was there. Even after Gentiles had converted, many were unwilling to let go of the social ideas they grew up around, such as stressing extravagancy on such a thing like a meeting place, or hierarchy in worship achieved through wealth, which is not a part of the original Christian teaching. But we see this idea continuing throughout Christian history. So, one might be thinking what these great thinkers of Christian thought had to say about this influence. We can look for the answer with the Apostle Paul, who was a follower of Christ and who had also seemed to have taken a special interest in converting Gentiles. Paul, originally known as Saul, was a Roman soldier turned Christian after God took his sight away, only to restore it by Ananias of Damascus in Acts 5. Paul is a unique figure and a very prominent one in the New Testament, as countless of his letters make it to the canon. Paul recognizes the money in these Gentile churches and possibly even relies on their contribution, the early Christian church needing material support that these Gentiles had. There are references of a collection in his letters like this one, where Paul informs the Roman Christians that he will be returning to Jerusalem to deliver the collection or the funds he must have accumulated. This shows that he used this Gentile influence to his advantage. But that being said, he doesn't outright express any sort of leniency towards these people, expressing in letters such as Corinthians explicit forbiddance of idols and other forms of polytheistic worship these Gentiles were used to and still snuck into their practices. This shows that despite relying on these Gentiles, he still had a spine. This asks the question of how new believers were able to assimilate without bringing parts of their understanding of religion in the world around them with them. The answer is simple. They found much more subtle ways to synchronize the two. Christian sainthood, in a sense, learns to function as a compromise to existing social structures. The depiction of saints might often mirror that of which we see in Roman religion. And even agents such as the Holy Trinity or the Virgin Mary are portrayed in countless different ways. For example, the idea of a universal mother figure was a common idea in mythology, making Mother Mary a popular figure as a result. And this was all accepted. But why? Why was this religion accepting of depicted images where Judaism was not? The influx of Gentiles and their contribution in terms of funds might be the answer. God was allowed to be depicted in the church as long as one noted that they were not technically worshipping the material thing, but the greater essence, and saints were seen as vessels or used for intercessory prayer. But Roman influences don't just start there. Depictions of Christ, such as a statue of the Good Shepherd, show strong Roman techniques and often have clear similarities to gods such as Hermes, which is the god shown next to the statue on the left, or there are often cases where Christ looks very similar to the god Apollo. So, this obviously blurs the lines between right and wrong in terms of idol worshipping, as Christ is seen as a Roman god. And polytheistic influences that Christians refuse to admit clearly exist, like in cases such as this. Idolophile Christians defended these as images rather than depictions or idols. Yet it proves that many could not rid themselves of the material understanding of God and the worship of different deities. It should also be noted that the idea of sainthood was not new. Saints are known for their ethical ways, and people like Socrates or Plotinus were known to have achieved this status of sainthood in a similar sense to the Christian idea. They, of course, differ in the sense that Christian saints are never meant to become gods, whereas pagan saints build their own structure of belief and intend to change the way people see divinity rather than living up to what divinity wants. But does the cult of the saints really differ that much when it comes to deifying a person? Both types of saints practice ethics and attempt to uphold a moral code, and are often worshipped in a similar manner. But again, Christianity isn't willing to accept these two ideas as the same thing. Either way, despite Christianity being the strictly monotheistic religion, it cannot fully rid itself from the polytheistic structure developed by the Romans. Again, this basically entails the fact that one cannot discard the effects Rome had on shaping history, and Christians cannot say they were not influenced in the process. So this has outlined some of the basic structures of Christianity that have elements of Roman